Seated. I just would like to welcome, my name is Beth Cruzy from the Monshire, and I'd like to welcome everybody to this incredible gathering tonight. And I would personally like to thank all the people involved with putting this together, and from SERG to the Sierra Club to the dealers, the people who brought their cars here. I mean, it's fantastic to see such a great turnout. Quick housekeeping, there are two restrooms. Well, there's a restroom right outside the door here if anybody needs that. We do need to be out by 8:30, so just keep that in mind. In case anybody didn't notice on their way in, we have this little dinosaur out in the middle that officially opens on Saturday, so you guys all got a sneak preview. So we're really excited about the exhibit, and glad to know that those fossils aren't going to be used for fueling cars, right? So anyway, so thank you and welcome. You've got a great presentation ahead.
Thanks, Beth. Thank you, everybody, for coming. So that was Beth Cruzy, and Beth is, Beth, what's your official role?
Director of Marketing and Communications.
With the Monshire, and the Monshire is one of the sponsors for tonight and has made this facility available to us. So thanks, everybody. So I'm Bob Walker. I'm Director of Sustainable Energy Resource Group, or SERG. We're a nonprofit in Thetford, and we worked closely with the Sierra Club, who we've done a lot of work with over the years and had some great programs in this room. And woo, not quite yet. Not yet. Maybe when the slides get going, we'll turn them down. So really happy to see everybody here. I think it's an indication of how much interest, excitement there is about electric vehicles, and I hope you all got a chance to see a number of the vehicles and maybe get a couple of test rides. We're going to have a program, and I'm going to do a couple of introductions and thank yous for folks who helped make this possible, and go over the agenda, and then we'll get going. So I want to thank the sponsors for tonight's program, Lamoille Valley Ford, Twin State Ford, Lovering Mitsubishi, and Zoom Bikes for all helping to make this possible. So, I also want to thank all the electric car vehicle owners who brought their cars in addition to the dealers and made those available for demonstrations and test rides. And we're going to have another opportunity, you will, towards the end, to talk with the owners and for the owners to briefly introduce themselves so you can identify who they are, and the car dealers so you can go up and talk with them too. I also wanted to mention that SERG and the Upper Valley Sierra Club are both nonprofit organizations that depend upon your support to bring programs together like this. We have sign-up sheets at our tables if you're not on our lists and want to be, so you can learn about more events that are going on like this. Please visit our tables and add your names to those lists. And the Sierra Club also depends on getting names and idea of how many people are here at events that they do for some of their support. So I encourage you to visit our tables and the tables of the other organizations that have some displays here. There's a lot of interesting things for you to learn. Also want to thank all the volunteers who helped with the setup and the directing of the traffic and everything. You did a great job out there on the road, you gals. I appreciate that. Finally, I wanted to thank the media that came today, because it's great to reach all of you, but there's a lot more folks out there that we want to get this word out to. So I wanted to give a shout out to the Valley News, Community Access TV, Energy Action Network, WDEV Radio, Royalton Radio, and Vermont Public Radio for helping to cover this event and get the word out. Thank you. The agenda for the night, in a minute I'll introduce, or actually I'm going to introduce Carl Chemnitzer, but then Dave Roberts from Drive Electric Vermont is going to give about a half-an-hour presentation Then we'll have quick introductions of the electric car owners and the dealers that are here. There'll be an open question-answer discussion for about a half an hour, for about 15 or 20 minutes. And then about 8 o'clock, we'll kind of break that formal open gathering here, and people will just go around and talk with individuals for about another 15 minutes, and then we'll all have to pitch in and help move the chairs and clean up, because we do need to be out of here by 8:30. All right, any questions on how it's all going to go? All right, so I want to introduce Carl Chemnitzer. Carl was a great organizer in helping to pull this all together. Carl's with the Sierra Club. He's going to introduce Dave and say a couple things about the Sierra Clubs. Thanks again for coming.
I'm going to keep my remarks really short, let Dave do the talking. I just want to point out that the National Sierra Club is actively promoting both solar and electric vehicles. They have initiatives going for both of those energy-saving categories. So, having said that, I'll introduce Dave.
Well, thank you very much, Bob and Carl, and thanks everybody for coming out tonight. This is a really big crowd. It's wonderful to see so many interested people, and I'm really thrilled to share some of the work that we're doing at Drive Electric Vermont and some of the background on the vehicles. So my name's, once again, Dave Roberts. I work at the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, which is a Burlington-based nonprofit that works on reducing the economic and environmental costs of energy use. We are the main lead organizer for Drive Electric Vermont, which works with a number of different state agencies, electric utilities, auto dealers, basically anyone who's interested in electric vehicles in Vermont. We welcome them to join our stakeholder group. We have quarterly meetings where we discuss some of the latest information coming out and how we can further support getting more of these vehicles in Vermont. So my talk tonight is basically going to cover briefly transportation efficiency in general, so where do EVs fit into the overall transportation picture. Spend some time just introducing electric vehicle technology. Talk about how the vehicles charge, what the equipment looks like, what some of the costs involved are. Talk some about what those of you who are thinking about a vehicle, or maybe after today you're thinking a little more seriously about the vehicles that you saw on display out there, or maybe you went for a ride. So we'll spend some time just thinking about some of the different considerations that often come up when someone's thinking about a plug-in electric vehicle. And then, of course, we want to leave some time for discussion. So I'm going to be going through these slides fairly rapidly because we want to make sure that there's time for a discussion. So if I kind of gloss over something, feel free to ask a question, or I'd certainly be happy to follow up with you later if you have additional questions. So transportation efficiency in general, this is a chart just showing the overall picture as far as greenhouse gas emissions in Vermont. This is the latest data that the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources has prepared. And transportation is the single largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in Vermont's 46% of the overall emissions profile. So if we're not thinking or taking some actions on transportation, then we're really missing a very significant part of the overall greenhouse gas emissions picture. So where do electric vehicles fit into the overall transportation picture? So this is a chart looking at the energy efficiency per passenger mile of some different types of transportation options. So up at the top you have your sort of average conventional car with a solo driver or a single occupant vehicle, which is up around 6,000 BTUs per passenger mile, and a BTU is just a measure of energy consumption. Transit bus, unfortunately a lot of transit buses don't run completely full, so we want to increase ridership on our existing buses so we can start to see what you see down below is another item for transit buses. When the seats are all full, they're actually very efficient, so we want to increase ridership on those buses. And then you can see electric vehicle solo driver is a fraction of the energy consumption of a conventional average gasoline vehicle. And of course, walking and bicycling, even better. There are some electric bikes out there which fit somewhere in between a vehicle and a human-powered bicycle. But you can see you know, if you can walk or bicycle, that's going to be your best option as far as environmental benefits and health benefits. But for those who may not be able to walk or bike, electric vehicle is definitely something you might want to consider. So why are they so efficient? What's so great about plug-in electric vehicles? Well, basically, this is just sort of showing the flow of energy in a gasoline vehicle versus an electric vehicle. And the top is the gasoline vehicle. And what happens in the gasoline engine, you burn the gasoline, and a lot of that energy that's embedded in the gasoline gets lost as heat. So that's over about 65% of the energy in the gasoline in a normal internal combustion engine is lost. Whereas with a plug-in electric vehicle, you're only looking at about a 12% loss in energy in terms of getting down the road, because the electric motors that are used are so much more efficient than an internal combustion engine. Just thinking about the vehicle technology, this actually isn't new technology. A lot of the basic principles go back to even before gasoline engines. Some of the earliest automobiles were electric vehicles. So these are some examples from the early 1900s of charging and vehicles in cities, and that's Jay Leno in the top center there driving his 1908 Acre Electric. So, you know, the technology has been tested. It's obviously improved rapidly over the last couple of years, but you know, the basic principles are well known and very reliable. A lot of refinement has occurred over the years. So when we talk about what's a plug-in electric vehicle or what's an electric vehicle, there's two basic types of plug-in electric vehicles. So at the top here is the option that does not plug in. This is a traditional hybrid, so like a Toyota Prius is the normal hybrid option. It does have a battery, but all of the energy that drives the vehicle comes from the gasoline that you put in the tank. So there's no external connection to the electric grid that allows you to run just on electricity. The next level up then is a plug-in hybrid vehicle, which essentially just has a larger battery and a connection so you can plug in the vehicle to the electric grid and recharge and sort of gain energy that way instead of from gasoline alone. So the example here on the chart is a Volt. There are a few more examples that I'll show in a moment. They tend to go anywhere from 10 to 40 miles on the battery, and then they'll switch into gasoline mode, and you can drive in some cases up to 500 miles or more on the gasoline fuel once your electric energy is depleted. And then you have all electric vehicles, so the Nissan Leaf is an example of that. It's powered solely by electricity. There's no gasoline whatsoever, there's no tailpipe. Those range anywhere from about 60 to 265 miles of range, depending on the vehicle. So just to run through, a lot of these were out front, so we have the Volt, Prius plug-in. This gets about 10 miles, the Volt gets about 40, the Ford C-Max Energy is about 20 miles of range before gasoline. The Ford Fusion, also about 20 miles of range. And then moving on to the all-electrics, you have the Nissan Leaf, which is about 74, actually I guess it's 84 in the current model. Mitsubishi i-MiEV, which is in the mid-60s in range. The Smart electric vehicle, the Ford Focus Energy, or all-electric Focus. BMW i3, this is new. We didn't have, this is I think the only car maybe that we didn't have here today represented. It's brand new. I think the Automaster in Burlington is getting, I think they have one in stock. We're hoping it'll be the pace car for the Vermont Marathon next week. But that's a really interesting vehicle. And then of course you have the Tesla, which is kind of the star of the show. No compromises, but a more expensive option. So you know, we're looking forward to some of the future models. And of course we have electric motorcycles. I didn't see the Zero. I understood there was going to be a Zero, but I didn't see it here. But that's a Zero electric motorcycle, which gets, I think, over 120 miles of range. Just thinking about, so those are the vehicles that are here now today, but all of the automakers are working on what's coming tomorrow. So this is just a quick overview to give you an idea that a lot of the automakers are going to be required to sell more of these zero-emission vehicles. You'll start to see some more SUV types of vehicles. So for example, Mitsubishi has a plug-in hybrid Outlander, which is all-wheel drive, more clearance, which is a frequent concern in our neighborhoods. So, a lot of these vehicles are going to be coming out over the next few years. That Mitsubishi is actually already out in Japan and Europe. And it's been so popular that they haven't been able to bring it to the US yet because they can't keep up with that demand. So if you didn't see something that really appealed to you out there tonight, wait a few years and you'll see a lot more options out there. Thinking about charging the vehicle, so most people will charge at home overnight. That's the easiest way to do it. You pull in the driveway. If you have a garage with an outlet, most of the time you can just plug into the outlet. It takes you 5 seconds to do it. You walk away and it's ready to go in the morning. There are some other options if you want to do it faster, but that's the easiest. After home, charging at your place of employment is, for some folks, maybe you have a 40-mile commute and you own a Volt, so you can get to work on the battery, but you need to charge up at work to be able to get home on electric. So we're trying to work with more employers to get charging at places of employment to help those folks out. And then public charging is really kind of the most visible charging, but it's used the least frequently. So we do have a pretty robust network of charging in Vermont, but we recognize that we still have some gaps, and I'll show you in a minute where some of those are. But just to run through the specific equipment that's used, so on the left here is what's called level 1 chargers. That just plugs into a standard 120 volt outlet. All the vehicles will come with these. Sometimes they call them like a convenience charger. Very straightforward, easy to use device. After that, you can see some examples of what are called level 2 chargers, which run on 208 or 240 volt electricity. So that's like a dryer voltage. These are examples of ones that you might see in a public or workplace location, but they may actually have on the Drive Electric table, there's a level 2 unit that's about $500 that you could put in your garage or at home. Level 1 and level 1 will be many hours to get a full charge. Level 2, depending on the vehicle, might be anywhere from 3 to 6 or 7 hours, or maybe more if you're in a Tesla with the larger battery. So that could be more time than some folks want to wait if they're thinking about a longer trip. So the next level up is what's called DC fast charging, which will give you about an 80% charge in a half an hour. And this is, not all the vehicles have this capability. It tends to be just the all-electric vehicles right now that have this option. And this is some shots from the Nissan dealer in South Burlington, which has the first what's called CHAdeMO charger, which works with the Nissan and Mitsubishi units. In the upper right, you might be able to see there's 2 different plugs that someone's holding there. One is called CHAdeMO, which is what the Asian manufacturers are using, and the other is called SAE Combo, which is what the European and Americans are using. So, for example, the BMW is using the SAE plug. So there's a little bit of the VHS beta format war going on with fast charging, and we're hoping we get over that pretty quickly. But in the meantime, some of the equipment manufacturers are actually making charging equipment that has both types of plugs on the unit to just kind of solve that issue, nip it in the bud. And then you also have Tesla has their own supercharger network, which is only for Tesla owners, but they put in a nationwide network. Hopefully we'll see one in the Upper Valley at some point. I know we've had some conversations with the Tesla folks about that. I think they just opened one in Albany, and there's been a lot of examples. I know some of the Tesla owners here I heard one gentleman's talking about his trip from Arizona back to Vermont. So, these superchargers are what make that happen. It's a pretty amazing technology. And if you go on the Tesla website, you can learn a lot more about it. So once again, just kind of giving you the sense for how much time it takes to charge. At home overnight, if you're charging level 1, you might be getting 5 miles of range per hour of charging, which is fine if you can let it go for several hours overnight. But if you're in the middle of a longer trip, you probably want to think more about some of the other higher power options. And just thinking about where are the public charging stations located. So on the left side is a map from the Drive Electric Vermont website. We keep track. We have a charging station locator map on the website. So as new stations are coming online, we keep this map updated. So you can go there for some information. And then there are also, in the vehicles and also on smartphones, there are several different apps that you can get that will tell you where the closest charging station is. So on the right here, this is something called PlugShare. And this is showing both the green are sort of public locations, so that could include hotels or stores or rest areas or any sort of car dealer, things of that sort. And then the blue ones that are little houses are actually people whose homes have they've opened up and invited people to come plug in their garage. So if you're stranded or worried about getting stranded, this is sort of one solution to that. And I'm happy to say that when I first started doing this presentation over a year ago, this PlugShare map was pretty sparsely populated. But over the last year, you see a lot more dots here. So hopefully some of those emergency calls I think they were always pretty rare, but I think these days they're getting much rarer as we start to get more of the actual charging in place. Another smartphone app, which actually right here tonight, is ChargePoint. So they have network charging equipment that allows you to tell if the equipment is in use or not. So this is in Montpelier, the blue shading means those 2 chargers in Montpelier are currently in use. So if I were driving to Montpelier in my Leaf, I would probably think, well, okay, I need to find another place to plug in, or convince them to put in some more charging, ideally. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on putting in charging stations, but anybody here who either works with a business or has a business or might be involved in putting in charging stations, there are some things that you can do that will really reduce the cost. If you can bundle it in as part of a larger project, so if you're doing any new construction or redoing a parking lot at your place of employment, that's the best time to put in charging station equipment. And the closer you can put it to where there's existing electric service, that's going to help reduce the cost even further. So that's the primary message with this slide. And then just thinking about where you put it in the parking lot. The cord length on most of the charging units are about 20 feet long. So if you can put it in between some different parking spots, so the cord could actually reach more than one spot, that'll help with making sure that the charger is available if somebody needs it. And it's interesting to note, it might be a little hard to see, but different manufacturers are putting the charging port in different places on the vehicle. So you just have to keep that in mind, and that particularly comes into play if you're trying to do any charging on street in parallel parking situation, which is sort of the least desirable way to do it, but sometimes you might be forced into that. So this is where the charging stations are at in Vermont right now, but it also shows in a little lighter shade where we think they're going to be, or where we know they're going to be over the next probably 6 months or so. The state of Vermont recently has funded 2 rounds of charging equipment in designated downtown areas. There are 24 designated downtowns around the state, and they're eligible to apply for grant funding. So I saw Paul Cameron here from Brattleboro. They just applied for one, and were successful, so they're going to be putting one in Brattleboro. Bennington also, several other locations around the state. And the bold towns here, Winooski, Burlington, Williston, Middlesex, Montpelier, Barre, and Rutland are all slated to get some of that fast charging equipment that I was talking about. So looking forward to seeing more of that over the next few months. We keep track of how many vehicles are registered in the state. We started doing this back in July of 2012, and back then we had 88 plug-in vehicles registered in 53 communities. As of April of this year, we're now up to 630 almost vehicles and in 130 communities around Vermont, which is over half the communities in Vermont have at least one plug-in vehicle registered now, which is pretty remarkable. And in terms of sales, it's about 1% of new vehicle sales last year were plug-in models, and we're hoping to get over 2% this year. Over time, the manufacturers are probably going to be required to sell around 15% of their new vehicles will need to be zero-emission vehicles, which could be either electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles. But hydrogen is still a ways to go. The fueling infrastructure is nowhere nearly as easy to install or pay for as electric vehicle charging. So this is just showing the sort of spread around the state over the last year and a half. Spreading. This is the current, and actually on the Drive Electric website, we do post these maps quarterly. So anybody who wants to keep up with the score here can go there quarterly and learn not only where they're at, but which vehicles are the most popular, as we do keep track of which models are registered. And that's here. So in Vermont, about 80% of the vehicles are plug-in hybrid electrics. People don't need to worry about the range issues as much with plug-in hybrids, so it makes sense that those are the more popular options, but we are seeing strong growth in basically across the board. This is a survey research that we did, and it's just looking at some of the barriers and motivators to thinking about a vehicle. So interested to those of you who were thinking about this tonight, some of the primary important concerns that people said, well, I would think about a vehicle, but this is a barrier. And it comes down to the range, although I think that's really more about all electric vehicles than plug-in hybrids. Performance on snow and dirt roads, which is a concern a lot of Vermonters share. The price of the vehicle, some thoughts about the battery health over time, and public charging infrastructure, maintenance costs. And then it starts to, some of those other issues weren't as important. Thinking about how we can get more people in these vehicles. Obviously, if we can find ways to lower the price, that's very important, and that has actually happened. A lot of the lease options that are out there are very attractive. I'm sure Lamoille Valley Ford and the Lumbering Mitsubishi would be happy to talk with you about the wonderful deals that they have. If the cost of gasoline were to increase significantly, that would be another motivator. Folks concerned about environmental impacts, maybe if you can get an incentive, there are tax credits, which I'll spend a little time talking about. So just thinking about some of these motivators and considerations if you're thinking about a purchase. Obviously, if you can save money, both on the maintenance, fuel maintenance, warranty, any incentives that the government is offering, that's all part of the cost of ownership picture. I'm going to dive into those in a little more detail. The performance of the vehicles, the safety of the vehicles, some of the environmental benefits, and then, of course, some of the leasing options are very attractive, as I just mentioned. So talking about saving money. This is just comparing the fueling costs for somebody running a gasoline vehicle versus an electric vehicle over a period of time. We had good data on what the cost of gasoline was and what the cost of electricity is. And you can see gasoline is all over the place, but it's always more expensive than electric. Electric is a regulated utility, so very stable rates. And so in this instance, if we were playing make-believe, if somebody could have been driving a Volt or a Leaf or Tesla from 2006 to 2011, they would have saved over $4,300 over that time period just in fuel costs. Thinking about some of the maintenance issues, hopefully some of you were given an opportunity to go for a ride in the vehicles, and if you were coming back down the hill into the parking lot here, you might have noticed that when the brakes were applied, the vehicle actually regenerates some of the power. Instead of just wasting the energy in the brake pads, it actually turns the electric motor into a generator, which then recharges the battery. So that helps both in terms of your energy efficiency, but also in terms of reducing wear and tear on your brakes. So, maintenance savings there. A lot fewer moving parts, and particularly all electric vehicles. You don't have oil changes, you don't have a lot of the issues that internal combustion engines have to deal with for maintenance, so some significant savings with electric vehicles. Some of the warranty issues, Vermont does adopt the California emissions requirements, which basically means if you're buying a plug-in hybrid in Vermont, you get a better warranty than other parts of the country that don't participate in that program. So that's a 10-year, 100,000-mile warranty on the battery, which is kind of the biggest concern a lot of folks have. And most people are leasing for just a few years, so this issue of battery health over time is really not a concern in the short term. There are federal tax credits. They're up to $7,500. They're based on the size of the battery. I have a little chart on our table, and might be some other information around from the dealers about what the amount of the incentive is for particular vehicles. So the Volt qualifies for the full amount, but some of the other vehicles with smaller batteries have a little bit less. They're not going to expire anytime soon. They top out at about $200,000 per manufacturer is when they start to phase out. And you can see we're around $50,000 or so right now for the leading manufacturers selling the vehicles. There was a tax credit for the charging equipment, but that expired at the end of last year. There's some work to renew it, but it's uncertain. I wouldn't count on that coming back, although we'd certainly like to see it. So when you blend all these things together and you start looking at the total cost of ownership of the vehicles, even if you might be paying more up front for the vehicle, it's sort of the classic energy efficiency, maybe you're paying a little more for efficient option, but in the long term, all these savings that we're talking about end up beating sort of conventional gasoline vehicles from a cost of ownership perspective. And those of you who got to ride on the Tesla know all about this, but the other vehicles too, electric motors have a lot of torque at low speed. which basically is that feeling of thrust or, kind of getting sucked back in your seat when you first press on the accelerator. So the vehicles perform great, even the options that cost less than the Tesla. So those of you who are worried about the performance of the vehicles, you don't want to drive a golf cart, that sort of thing, and sometimes the argument that you hear, that none of these vehicles operate in that way. So a lot of fun to drive. Performance in the cold weather is a real concern. This winter in Vermont, I've been through 2 winters with my Nissan Leaf, and this last winter was definitely harsher than the one before. And you do lose a significant amount of range in the winter, particularly if you're running the heat. And that goes for pretty much all the vehicles. So, as the technology continues to improve, we'll have more efficient heating options, better battery technology. When the weather warms up again, the battery recovers just fine. But you do need to think about, if you're right on the bubble of, if you're thinking about a Nissan Leaf, for example, which has an 84-mile range, and your daily commute is in that neighborhood, then you need to factor in that in the winter you're going to be getting less range than what it's rated for. And a lot of the plug-in hybrids, actually, when it gets really cold out, they'll just turn on the engine because they need it for heat or other operational considerations. So cold weather is a concern, but they run just fine, even at 0 degrees or below. They'll still run fine. You just have to be aware that there are some issues with range being impacted. Some folks worry about fires in the vehicles. Tesla had a few sort of high-profile events happen. But I think, to me, the telling statistic is you need to compare that with what's going on with gasoline vehicles. And there are over 187,500 fires in 2011 in gasoline vehicles, and that's not including the 5,000 more that happened at the fueling stations. So, gasoline vehicles are subject to this issue in a much more dramatic way than the electric vehicles that we've seen. It's understandable that people are concerned about safety, but I think the track record is that the vehicles have proven themselves as being very safe. And there have been a number of trainings for Vermont first responders to make sure that they know how to deal with the high voltage systems in these vehicles if they come out and need to respond to a crash. Although, as far as I know, I haven't heard of any significant crashes with electric vehicles in Vermont. I'm sure I'll hate to be informed that I'm wrong about that one of these days, but they are very safe vehicles. Just thinking about some of the environmental benefits. This is a complicated issue, but I'll just gloss the surface of this and say that where the vehicle, the overall emissions for the vehicle, of course, you need to take into consideration where your electricity is coming from. And there are a variety of different sources of electricity. Some are much worse than others. So coal is sort of at the bottom of the list. According to the Union of Concerned Scientists, it's about the equivalent. If you're running an electric vehicle on coal, it's like driving a vehicle that gets about 30 miles per gallon. But things start to improve rapidly as you start looking at some of the different options. And certainly if you're running on solar, wind, hydro, geothermal systems, then your mile per gallon equivalent is much higher. I mean, I think geothermal is sort of ridiculous, 7,600 miles per gallon equivalent, but kind of gives you the idea that those benefits will increase as our electric grid improves. And Vermont already has a pretty good profile as far as emissions in the electric grid here. The New England grid in general, according to Union Concerned Scientists, is about 75 miles per gallon equivalent running on electricity. But, and this is something that we hope will continue to improve over time. And there's some folks here talking about solar. They have some great information about sizing your solar system if you're thinking about getting an electric vehicle. It's been a lot of great tie-ins with some of the solar projects around the country. This is just an example of Oak Ridge National Lab, where they have a parking area with EV charging available. And of course, right around the corner, some of you tonight probably saw the King Arthur Flower setup that does have solar panels right next to it. In the long term, there's some really cool stuff going on in the research realm where some of the vehicles can be used. So on the left side of this is a larger truck that has a big battery and a higher power connection to the grid, and that can be used basically as a storage system for the solar on this facility. So solar energy can charge the truck up at night, or if something happens with their grid interconnection, they can actually power their operations from the batteries in the truck. On the right is sort of the home version of that. That's the unit that Nissan is selling in Japan for Nissan Leaf owners, where you can run your home off your car for probably a day or two. So some really neat stuff going on. Those Nissan, what they call their EV power stations, not in the US yet, but they are thinking about bringing it here, and utilities are doing some work on demand response programs that would allow you to basically cede control of when your vehicle charges, so the utility manages that, and they do it at the time that has the least impact to the electric grid. Just thinking about leasing, this is a great option for folks. It's over 90% nationally, the plug-in vehicles are leased. The federal incentive, which is normally a tax credit that you'd have to claim at tax time, gets passed through as part of the leasing deal, so that just simplifies everything. And if you wouldn't be eligible for the full amount of the tax credit normally if you purchased, the leasing company can handle that for you. It's going to protect you as the technology continues to improve rapidly. You'll see some real benefits because you'll be able to trade in your lease car and start looking at some of the newer technology, and then that car that's coming off lease will be available in the used market. One caveat with that is if you do put a lot of miles on your car, some of the leasing options may not be as attractive because they do put mileage limits on the leasing. Just some resources on the Drive Electric Vermont website. If you're interested, I encourage you to check it out, driveelectricvt.com. We do have some event listings. We try and keep up with the latest news in Vermont. And as far as what's next, we do have a place on our website where you can take a pledge that your next car will be an electric vehicle. You can come to things like this or help organize them. This has been a great event. You can start thinking about, if you're in a workplace, how you can get some charging in place there. If you're active in the community, maybe there are some community programs that you could work on getting some charging, or looking at your local zoning or building codes to simplify the permitting process. This is just me and my Leaf, which I'm happy to spend some time talking about. And then at this point, I think that's the end of my remarks, so happy to have some discussion. I know we want to open it up for any of the electric vehicle owners in the crowd who might want to contribute their thoughts to this conversation as well.
Beth, can we get the lights back up again? Thanks. Thank you, Dave. That was great.